And welcome to this study video for higher physical education. Today's video is going to be about the performance profile wheel, which is a method of collecting data upon your performance. During your higher PE course, on screen just now are the methods of collecting information that we will have covered so far: the performance profile wheel, the SCAT test, the bleep test, and the mental toughness questionnaire. Today's video is going to focus on the performance profile wheel, or PPW, and we're going to look at how we might describe the method, to explain possible challenges associated with carrying out this method, to explain why we might use a performance profile wheel to collect information on your performance, and we're also going to have a go at trying to analyse and evaluate the method. Now, the performance profile wheel is known as an analytical tool, and an analytical tool is a test which is based upon someone's opinion or judgment. If you see a question which is asking you to identify an analytical tool that was used to collect information on the mental factor, a top tip here is, if you are in any doubt, to write about the performance profile wheel. Generally speaking, these questions would ask you to identify or to describe an analytical tool, and it will specify the factor. Some examples of analytical tools that we've covered so far are the initial observation schedule, which we would have done at the start of your badminton block, and then again at the middle and at the end. And also for the mental and for the emotional factor, the performance profile wheel. Some tests can also be classified as recognised tests, and these are tests which have set rules and procedures and are the same worldwide. On screen just now are two examples of recognised tests: the SCAT test and the mental toughness questionnaire. And these are standardised tests that are used across the world, and generally speaking, these tests will give you a score. A good way to remember the difference between a recognised test and an analytical tool is if a recognised test gives you data which you can compare to norms. And if you think about the bottom of the mental toughness questionnaire, on the other side, there's normative data, and you can compare your score to those norms. And if you have a look at the bottom of the SCAT test on the right hand side of your screen, you can see the normative data. If your score is less than 17, you've got what's deemed to be a low level of anxiety. If it's between 17 and 24, then it's classed as an average level, and if it's more than 24, then you've got a high level of anxiety. So just to recap, if a question is asking about analytical tools, then write about the performance profile wheel, or if it's about the physical factor, you've then got a decision to make between the profile wheel or the initial observation schedule. And on screen just now in green are examples of recognised tests for each factor. So today's video is going to look in depth at the performance profile wheel, which looks like this. Remember, our performance profile wheel is a double-sided sheet of A4 paper. Now, this can be used to collect data on every factor. The only way in which this method will change is the sub-factors that are written around the outside of the wheel. On screen just now are some notes about completing the performance profile wheel. If you remember, the performance profile wheel that we have here at Larbert High School has two wheels on one side and it has two wheels on the other side. And when we're describing this, we want to make statements which are descriptive, such as a double-sided sheet of A4 paper with two wheels on each side. If you have a look at the wheel on the right hand side, you can see it's split into 8 segments, and for this particular one there is 4 emotional subfactors written around the outside of the wheel: anger, anxiety, fear and happiness. How this works is you're going to complete this before or after a performance, and you're going to rate yourself out of 10 for each subfactor. A score of 1 is an area of weakness, and a score of 10 is an area of strength. And to complete this, you're going to shade up from the middle box and give yourself a rating out of 10. Now, the wheel on the right-hand side is also completed by the performer, and that's where you would then compare the emotional performance or the mental performance to that of a model performer. So you need to identify a model performer from your sport and then shade up from the middle. And generally speaking here, the scores are going to be quite high, probably around 8, 9 or 10. Once you've done that, you can then hand this piece of paper to your coach, and they will then complete a performance profile wheel based upon you and then based upon the same model performer. So some common questions in higher PE are to describe a method used to collect information on the mental, emotional, social or physical factor, and generally speaking that would be worth 2 to 4 marks. You may also, for this particular method, be asked to describe an analytical tool used to collect information on the impact of mental, emotional, social or physical factors. Now, keywords here in the question for this particular question, the command word is describe. So we need to be making short, sharp, descriptive points that really paint a picture to the marker how you complete this method, what it looks like, who completes it, where it's completed, when it's completed, and most importantly, how do you actually carry it out. Other keywords in this particular question are around collecting information. If you see those words in a question, then it is referring to testing, and the question will specify which factor it is for. So as I've mentioned there, if we're going to describe the profile wheel, we have to think about what is the profile wheel, what does it look like, where is it completed, when is it completed, who completes it, who would check it, and then most importantly, how do you complete it? So making descriptive points, saying things like, I read the sub-factor and then I shade up from the middle, and then if you can give an example there of what you rated yourself, that would also be descriptive. It might be a good idea here to pause the video and have a look at the example answer for a describe question that is on screen just now. Okay, for the next part of this video, we're going to look at trying to explain why this method is suitable or reliable. Now, if you get asked why you've picked this method or why it is suitable and reliable, it's just asking you to identify reasons for using this test. You may, in a separate question, be asked about the challenges when carrying out this method of collecting data, and this is going to have to think about what might do with the process that will make it invalid or unreliable, and we're going to look at each of these questions separately. Now remember, when we're answering explain questions, we're looking for the point, example, and explanation. On the left hand side here, you can see the point, and then you can see the part of explanation that matches up with this. So this candidate's identified that a reason for using the profile wheel would be to find out their strengths and weaknesses in that factor. You could give an example here to show depth of knowledge. So you could say something like, for example, I rated myself as a 3 out of 10 for anger, and this shows that anger is a weakness. And then my point of explanation might be to say something like, this means I can create a PDP to improve upon my specific weakness, which is anger. All of that would get us 1 mark. Other reasons for using a profile wheel are that it can be kept as a permanent record, it can be checked by a coach, we can set goals and targets based upon that, we can compare ourselves to model performers, and we can complete this method after a performance on our own. Now, it's not simply enough just to make that point, you have to then give the explanation that you can see on the right hand side of the table here, which matches up. Again, it might be a good idea to pause the video here and take some notes. So this is what an example question would look like. Explain why this method, and this would probably link to a question that came before. I've put in brackets here, the PPW is suitable when collecting information on emotional factors. Now, you can see here that I've highlighted explain because that is the command word. So that's going to tell us how they want us to structure our answer. And we're going to do that through the point, example, and explanation structure. And it's also worth 4 marks. So we need to give 4 separate points of explanation. If you face this question in your exam or in your prelim, it would be a really good idea to write and annotate on the paper like I have done here. So here you can see a full answer. Again, it might be a good idea here to pause the video and look at how these specific answers are structured. If we go through the first one together, a reason why the PPW is suitable to collect information on emotional factors is it allows me to find out my strengths and weaknesses in that factor. For example, if I rate myself as 3 out of 10 for anger, I know this is my weakness. And here's my explanation. This means I can create a PDP to improve upon my specific weakness over the next 10 weeks. Okay, so we're now going to look at a second explain question, and this one's going to be to do with challenges associated with carrying out the profile wheel. When we're talking about challenges with carrying out the method, this is things that might make our data unreliable or invalid. So for example, not getting our performance profile wheel checked by a coach, that's something that could make our data unreliable. Not keeping this method as a permanent record, that means that at the start of our PDP you're going to fill out a profile wheel, and it's important that you keep that baseline test so that you can compare back to it as a permanent record. Not answering it after a performance, and that means that the information is not going to be fresh in our head. And another challenge that we may face is being dishonest or biased compared to your own performance. Remember, with this method, you rate your own performance, and if you don't answer it truthfully, then that will affect the reliability of the data which you gather. So a question might look something like, explain the challenges you faced when carrying out this method to give accurate or reliable information on emotional factors. Again, it's an explain question, so we're going to use the point, example, and explanation. Another keyword in the question here is about challenges. So if you see that and it's then talking about why the data would be accurate or reliable. We're then thinking about potential problems that could be associated with carrying out the performance profile wheel, and also pay attention to the marks. It's worth 3 marks, so we have to give 3 different reasons. So we're going to make a point, we're then going to develop that with an example, and then we're going to highlight our explanation here, and the explanation part is going to start with this means, and it's always going to come back to our data being accurate or reliable, because that's what the question is asking us. So, first example, a challenge I faced when completing the PPW was dishonesty. For example, I rated myself as a 6 out of 10 for anger when my coach had said I should be 4 out of 10. This meant my data was unreliable as I hadn't completed the questionnaire accurately and it wasn't a fair reflection of my strengths and weaknesses. I'll let you read point number 2 and point number 3 in your own time. Again, it might be a good idea to pause the video here. So we're now going to move on to our second last command word, evaluate. And at higher PE, you might be asked to evaluate the effectiveness or the suitability of a method of collecting information. For this particular question, you have to think about reasons why the profile wheel might be effective or it might be ineffective. And some of these reasons might overlap with the question that we've just looked at before. Now, the key difference here is because this is an evaluate question, you must include a judgment in your answer. And I would like you to use terms such as effective, ineffective, useful, helpful, beneficial, or limited to show the marker that you are making a judgment. So on screen just now is what an example question would look like, something that you may face in your prelim or in your exam. Evaluate how effective this method was for collecting data on mental factors. Now, generally speaking, this would be a follow-up question. This might be part B, and part A might ask you to identify a method used to collect information on mental factors, or it might ask you to describe a method used to collect information on mental factors. And for that particular question, you would have wrote about the profile wheel. So that's what we're going to evaluate here. Now, for our evaluate questions, we're going to identify something. So we're going to pick out something that might make it effective or ineffective. We're going to give a judgment. So we're going to have that language that we looked at earlier. And then we're going to give the value. What benefit does that have to your performance, or in this case, to do with the data which is gathered? Now, when it's talking about evaluate questions, we want to then be thinking about what are the positives and what are the negatives associated with this particular method. And again, similar to explain questions, if it's worth 3 points, we need to give 3 different reasons. And I would strongly suggest that you probably go for 2 positives and 1 negative here. So some points of evaluation are shown on screen, and how I've split this up is into effective and ineffective, and it might be a good idea to jot these down on your prelim paper or in your exam paper. So if we were evaluating how effective the profile wheel was for collecting data on the mental factors, some points or things that we could pick out for it being effective are that it allows us to find out our strengths and weaknesses. Again, we can keep it as a permanent record. It's effective because it's going to get checked by a coach. It's effective as it allows you to set goals and targets. It's going to be effective because it allows you to compare yourself to a model performer. And it's also going to give us effective, reliable and accurate data if we complete it on our own. Now, we've touched on this earlier. The data could be ineffective if we're not honest, if we don't get it checked by a coach, if we don't keep hold of it as a permanent record, and if we pick unrealistic model performers. And again, it's not enough just to list those reasons, we then have to develop them into a full answer, and we're going to look at how we might do that just now. So on screen just now is 3 example answers. Again, it might be a good idea to pause the video here. For the first point of evaluation, the PPW is effective, so there's our judgment, method of collecting data on mental factors because it is checked by a coach. So that's my first reason. That's the first thing that I've identified, is that I'm getting it checked by a coach and it's effective. So what value does that have? Well, this means I can complete the questionnaire honestly. Myself and a coach can check my responses to ensure they're accurate representation of my strengths and weaknesses. For the second answer, the PPW is effective method of collecting data on mental factors because it can be kept and compared back to. So again, we've said it's effective, and the thing that we've identified is that we can keep it and compare back to it as a permanent record. This means I can complete a profile wheel in week 1 as a baseline test and then recomplete this in the middle and at the end of my PDP to check if my PDP is working and if I am improving my mental skills. So that last part there is the value. And lastly, the PDP is ineffective if I do not complete it honestly. This means if I rate myself too highly, I will get information which is invalid. This could mean I think I am improving during a PDP as I've rated myself 7 out of 10 for concentration when actually I should be rating myself 4 out of 10. This could lead to me getting false information and working on the wrong weakness during my PDP. And that's your value at the end there. The thing we've identified is that we haven't answered it honestly, and our judgment is that it was ineffective. Okay, so moving on to our last command word, analyse, and probably the most difficult of them all. Now, for an analyse question, we really need to try and break the method down and go into the minute details. You need to consider the things that are important about this method of gathering data. For this, you might need to think about the conditions that it's completed in and what you can do with the data, etc. Now, we're going to answer using the 3I structure, so we're going to identify something, we're going to give a really specific, minute detail about the profile wheel. We're then going to give the implication, so what could that mean? Why would it be important? And then in the last part here, we're going to then give the impact. What does it lead to? And for this particular question, it's going to be about the suitability or the reliability of the data. So on screen just now is what a question might look like. Analyse the method you use to collect information on the physical factor. Now, again, this would link to a question that's come before. Generally speaking, it would be an identify or a describe question that comes first, and then this would be the follow-up question. So analyse, and I've highlighted that because that's our command word. It tells us how we're going to answer the question, and we're going to use that 3I structure that I just spoke about, and it's worth 4 marks. So we need to come up with 4 points of analysis. On screen just now are 4 points of analysis. Now, this is only the identify, so these are the things that I've picked out, and I'd like you to try and use this kind of language when you are answering an analyse question. It is important when completing a PPW that you complete it on your own away from others. And you would then have to give the implication, so this means that, and then tell me about it, and then you would have to link it back to the data and why that would be suitable or reliable. It is important that you get your PPW checked by a coach. Again, you would then need to give the implication. It is important that you keep your PPW somewhere safe. And then the last one, it is important when completing a profile wheel that you complete it straight after a performance. So we're really trying to go in depth and give points of analysis that identify something which is going to be important for gathering accurate, reliable, or valid data. We're now going to have a look at what these answers might look like in full. So, first one, it is important when completing a PPW that you complete it on your own away from others. This means I complete it honestly and may not be influenced by the presence of my teammates. So that's the implication. This leads to me gathering reliable data, which is an accurate reflection of my social strengths and weaknesses. Now that says social there, and it should say physical because the question says physical. It is important that you get your PPW checked by a coach. So that's my second point of analysis. This means if I have an individual who I work closely with and who knows me well, we can check to see if they agree with my answers. This leads to me gathering accurate and reliable data on the physical factor. Third point of analysis, it's important that you keep your PPW somewhere safe. This means I can keep my initial PPW as a baseline and compare back to it throughout my program. This leads to me being able to recomplete the profile wheel and compare back to them and check for progress during my PDP. And the last point of analysis, it's important when completing a PPW that you complete it straight after a performance. What's the implication? Well, this means I can complete it based on a recent performance whilst it is still fresh in my mind. And again, this leads to me gathering accurate data, which is based upon my last performance. So here you can see the identify, the implication, so this means that, and then the impact this leads to, and in this particular case, we're going to come back to the data. Hope you found this useful and it will help you in preparation for your prelim. Thanks very much for watching. If you're looking for more study videos, have a look at my YouTube, Mr. Cassell's PE. There's 48 videos on there for higher PE, all of which are 3 to 12 minutes long. Thanks very much.